Chapter 6 Missed Opportunities. It's February. It's freezing cold. The streets are lined with soot covered snow. As Angela commutes to and from work in the dark, what gets her through the end of another long winter is thinking about next summer's vacation. She is considering two very different possibilities: touring in Northern California or a week at a beach house on Cape Cod. How does she decide what to do? She might begin by considering what matters to her most when she goes on vacation. She appreciates the splendor of nature, so of course her destination has to be beautiful. She loves to spend time outdoors, but she hates heat and humidity, so the weather has to be just right. She loves long stretches of isolated coastline, but she also likes good food and a bustling nightlife, people watching and window shopping. Then again, she hates crowds. She likes to be physically active, but sometimes she also likes to spend an afternoon just lounging in a comfortable chair and reading. So now what? Two tasks remain. Angela has to assess the importance of these various features of vacation destinations. For example, is good weather more important than bustling nightlife? Then she has to see how Northern California and Cape Cod stack up. If one of these options is better than the other in every respect that Angela cares about, her decision will be easy. But more likely, she'll discover that each option has strengths that the other one lacks. So she'll end up having to make trade offs. Nonetheless, if she lists the things that matter to her, determines how much they matter, and evaluates how each possibility measures up, Angela will be able to make a choice. Now, let's say that a friend complicates Angela's life by suggesting she consider a lovely little cottage in Vermont. There are mountains for hiking, lakes for swimming, an arts festival, good restaurants, warm dry days, and crisp, cool nights. In addition, the town is near Burlington, where the nightlife is energetic. Finally, Angela's friend points out to her that since Angela has several good friends who own vacation houses in the area, she'll be able to spend time with them. Spending time with the friends is something she didn't consider when choosing between California and Cape Cod. Now she needs to add it to her list of attractive features. Furthermore, she may want to reevaluate some of the scores she gave the first two places. She may knock Cape Cod's weather down a point or two because, in contrast with cool, clear Vermont alternative, it's not that great. But this possibility of being near friends gets Angela thinking. Her kids live far away and she misses them. If being with friends is nice, being with family is nicer. Maybe there's some place close to where her kids live that's beautiful. Her nice restaurants, good weather, and things to do at night. Or maybe there's some place that they would be interested in going to with her. New possibilities get entertained, and another new feature, being with her kids, gets added to Angela's list. Clearly, no one option is going to meet all her desires. She's simply going to have to make some trade offs. Michael, a talented college senior, is trying to choose between two jobs. Job A offers a good starting salary, modest pay opportunities for advancement, excellent security, and a lively, hospitable work atmosphere. Job B offers a modest starting salary, very good opportunities for advancement, decent security, and a rather formal, hierarchical office structure. While Michael is deliberating between jobs A and B, job C becomes available. Job C would take him to an exciting city. All of a sudden, attractiveness of location, something that had not been part of his deliberations, become relevant. How do the locations of jobs A and B stack up against the location of job C? And how much in salary, security, and so on is he willing to trade to be in this exciting place? Then the decision gets even more complex. Another job prospect turns up in a location that is close to family and old friends, something Michael had also not considered. How, how important is that? And then Michael's girlfriend lands a very good job in the same city as job A. How much weight should he give to this factor? How serious is this relationship anyway? In making a job choice, Michael will have to ask himself several hard questions. Is he willing to trade off salary for advancement opportunities? Is he willing to trade off quality of the job for quality of the city in which it is located? Is he willing to trade off both for being near his family? And is he willing to give up all of this to be near his girlfriend? Part of the downside of abundant choice is that each new option adds to the list of trade offs, and trade offs have psychological consequences. The necessity of making trade offs alters how we feel about the decisions we face. More important, it affects the level of satisfaction we experience from the decisions we ultimately make. Opportunity costs. Economists point out that the quality of any given option cannot be assessed in isolation from its alternatives. One of the costs of any option involves passing up the opportunities that a different option would have afforded. This is referred to as an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost of vacationing on the beach in Cape Cod is great restaurants in California. An opportunity cost of taking a job near your romantic partner is that you won't be near your family. Every choice we make has opportunity costs associated with it. Failing to think about opportunity costs can lead people astray. I often hear people justify their decisions to buy a house rather than continue renting by saying that they are tired of letting a landlord build up equity at their expense. Paying a mortgage company is investing, whereas paying rent is just throwing money out the window. This line of thinking is fair enough as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. Here is how far most home buyers take it. I have to make a down payment of $50,000. My monthly expenses, including mortgage, taxes, insurance, and utilities, will be the same as they would be in a rental. So, in effect, for an investment of $50,000, I get to have my monthly housing costs work for me, building up my equity rather than my landlord's. And I'm sure that I'll get more than that 50,000 back when I sell the house. No doubt about it, owning your own home is usually a smart investment. But what buyers leave out of this line of reasoning is the opportunity cost of putting that 50,000 into the house. What else could you do with it? You could put that 50,000 into stocks or treasury bills, or you could use it to finish law school and increase your earnings, or you could travel around the world and write that novel that you hope will utterly change your life. Some options are more realistic than others, and the wisdom of each depends on your life goals and your timing. As I write this, real estate certainly seems a better choice than stocks, but in 1996, with the market being about to soar, 50,000 in the right tech stocks with the right exit strategy might have made a fortune. The point is, even decisions that appear to be no-brainers carry the hidden costs of the options decline. Thinking about opportunity costs may not change the decisions you make, but it will give you a more realistic assessment of the full implications of that decisions. According to standard economic assumptions, the only opportunity costs that should figure into a decision are the ones associated with the next best alternative. So let's say your options for next Saturday night listed in order of preference include dinner in a nice restaurant, a quick dinner at a movie, music at a jazz club, dancing, cooking dinner for a few friends, going to a baseball game. If if you go for the dinner, the cost will be whatever you pay for the meal, plus the passed up opportunity to see a movie. According to economists, that's where your cost accounting should stop, which is also excellent advice for managing our own psychological response to choice. Pay attention to what you're giving up in the next best alternative, but don't waste energy feeling bad about having passed up an option farther down the list that you wouldn't have gotten to anyway. This advice, however, is extremely difficult to follow, and here's why. The options under consideration usually have multiple features. If people think about options in terms of their features rather than as a whole, different options may rank as second best or even best with respect to each individual feature. So, going to the movies may be the best way to stimulate the intellect. Listening to jazz may be the best way to relax. Dancing may be the most enjoyable way to get some exercise. Going to the ball game may be the best way to blow off some steam. Dinner at home with friends may be the best way to experience intimacy. Even though there may be a single second best option overall, each of the options you reject has some very desirable feature on which it beats its competition. So going out to dinner then means giving up opportunities to be intellectually stimulated, to relax, to get exercise, to blow off steam, and to experience intimacy. Psychologically, each alternative you consider may introduce still another opportunity you'll have to pass up if you choose your preferred option. If we assume that opportunity costs take away from the overall desirability of the most preferred option, and that we feel the opportunity costs associated with many of the options we reject, then the more alternatives there are from which to choose, the greater our experience of the opportunity costs will be. And the greater our experience of the opportunity costs, the less satisfaction we will derive from our chosen alternative. Why can't there be a job that offers a good salary, opportunities for advancement, a friendly work environment, an interesting location that has a job for my partner, and proximity to my family? Why can't there be a vacation where I get the beach and great restaurants, shops, and tourist sites? Why can't I have an intellectually stimulating, relaxed, physically active, and intimate night with friends? The existence of multiple alternatives makes it easy for us to imagine alternatives that don't exist, alternatives that combine the attractive features of the ones that do exist. And to the extent that we engage our imaginations in this way, we will be even less satisfied with the alternative we end up choosing. So, once again, a great variety of choices actually makes us feel worse. If there was some way to say objectively what was the best vacation or the best job or the best way to spend a Saturday night, then adding options could only make people better off. Any new option might turn out to be the best one, but there is no objective best vacation, job, or Saturday night activity. Ultimately, the quality of choices that matters to people is the subjective experience that the choices afford. And if beyond a certain point adding options diminishes our subjective experience, we are it. Worse off for it. The psychology of trade-offs. The psychology of trade-offs has been investigated in a series of studies in which participants are asked to make hypothetical decisions about which car to buy or which apartment to rent or which job to take based on a range of features including price. The list of alternatives are constructed so that in choosing one option, the participants will have to make trade-offs. In choosing a car, for example, one option may be more stylish but have fewer safety features than another. In choosing an apartment, one option may offer better space than another but in a less convenient location. In one study, participants were told that car A costs $25,000 and ranks high in safety 8 on a 10-point scale. Car B ranks 6 on the safety scale. Participants were then asked how much car B would have to cost to be as attractive as car A. Answering this question required making a trade-off, in this case between safety and price. It required asking how much each extra unit of safety was worth. If someone were to say, for example, that car B was only worth $10,000, they would clearly be placing great value on the extra safety afforded by car A. If instead they were to say that car B was worth $22,000, they will be placing much less value on the extra safety afforded by car A. Participants performed this task with little apparent difficulty. A little while later, though, they were confronted with the second task. They were presented with a choice between car A, safety rating 8 and price of $25,000, and car B, safety rating 6, and the price that they had previously said made the two cars equally attractive. How did they choose between two equivalent alternatives? Since the alternatives were equivalent, you might expect that about half the people would choose the safer, more expensive car and half would choose the less safe, cheaper car. But that is not what the researchers found. Most participants choose the safer, more expensive car. When forced to choose, most people refuse to trade safety for price. They acted as if the importance of safety to their decision was so great that price was essentially irrelevant. This choice was clearly different from the way people reacted to the task in which they had to establish a price that would make the two cars equivalent. If they had thought that safety was of overriding importance, they would have set the price of car B very low. But they didn't. So it wasn't that people refused to put a price on safety. Rather, when the time came to make the choice, they were simply unwilling to live by the price on safety that they had already established. Even though their decision was purely hypothetical, participants experienced substantial negative emotion when choosing between cars A and B. And if the experimental procedure gave them the opportunity, they refused to make the decision at all. So the researchers concluded that being forced to confront trade offs in making decisions makes people unhappy and indecisive. It isn't hard to understand this pattern. Imagine yourself choosing the less safe of two cars to save $5,000 only to have a major car accident later on. Could you live with yourself if it turned out that one of your loved ones would have been spared serious injuries if you'd been driving a safer car? Of course, you are reluctant to trade off safety for price. Of course, safety has overriding importance, but this is a very special case. Not so, it seems. Participants in these studies showed the pattern of reluctance to make trade offs, whether the stakes were high or low. Confronting any trade off, it seems, is incredibly unsettling, and as the available alternatives increase, the extent to which choices will require trade offs will increase as well. Avoiding decisions. What then do people do if virtually all decisions involve trade offs and people resist making them? One option is to postpone or avoid the decision. Imagine being in the market for a new music system and seeing a sign in a store window announcing a 1 day clearance sale on CD players. You can get a popular Sony CD player for only $99, well below list price. Do you buy it or do you continue to research other brands and models? Now imagine that the sign in the window offers both the $99 Sony and a $169 top of the line Iowa, also well below list price. Do you buy either of them or do you postpone the decision and do more research? When researchers asked, they found an interesting result. In the first case, 66% of people said they would buy the Sony and 34% said they would wait. In the second case, 27% said they would buy the Sony, 27% said they would buy the Iowa, and 46% said they would wait. Consider what this means. Faced with one attractive option, two-thirds of people are willing to go for it. But faced with two attractive options, only slightly more than half are willing to buy. Adding the second option creates a conflict, forcing a trade-off between price and quality. Without a compelling reason to go one way or the other, potential consumers pass up the sale altogether. By creating the conflict, this second option makes it harder, not easier to make a choice. Consumers need or want reasons to justify choices, as we see in a third hypothetical situation. A similar 1 day sale offers the $99 Sony and an inferior Iowa at the list price of $105. Here, the added option does not create conflict. The Sony is better than the Iowa and it's on sale. Not surprisingly, almost no one chooses the Iowa. Surprisingly, however, 73% go with the Sony as opposed to 66% when it was offered by itself. So the presence of a clearly inferior alternative makes it easier for consumers to take the plunge. Perhaps seeing the inferior Iowa bolsters people's confidence that the Sony is really a good deal. Though In a market with dozens of brands and models of CD players available, the presence of this second alternative doesn't really prove much. Even if inferior in every way, the second alternative provides an anchor or comparison that bolsters a buyer's reasons for choosing the first one. See Chapter 3. It helps buyers conclude that the Sony option is of good quality at a good price. Difficult trade-offs make it difficult to justify decisions, so decisions are deferred. Easy trade-offs make it easy to justify decisions, and single options lie somewhere in the middle. Conflict induces people to avoid decisions even when the stakes are trivial. In one study, participants were offered $1.50 for filling out some questionnaires. After the participants had finished, they were offered a fancy metal pen instead of the $1.50 and told that the pen normally cost about $2. 75% of the people chose the pen. In a second condition, participants were offered the $1.50 or a choice between the same metal pen and two less expensive felt tipped pens, also worth about $2. Now, fewer than 50% chose either of the pens, so the conflict introduced by the added option made it difficult to choose one pen or the other, and the majority of participants ended up choosing neither. It's hard to imagine why adding the pair of cheaper pens to the mix should do anything to alter the value of the good pen in comparison with the $1.50. If 75% of people think the good pen is a better deal than $1.50 in the first case, then 75% ought to think so in the second case as well. And there ought to be some people who think that getting two pens is a better deal. So more people, not fewer, ought to be going with pens rather than the cash when they have a choice. But the opposite occurs. There is another, more urgent example of how conflict induces people to avoid decisions. In this study, doctors were presented with a case history of a man suffering from osteoarthritis and asked whether they would prescribe a new medication or refer the patient to a specialist. Almost 75% recommended the medication. Other doctors were presented with a choice between two new medications or referral to a specialist. Now only 50% went with either of the medications, meaning that the percentage of those referring doubled. Referral to a specialist is, of course, a way to avoid a decision. Similarly, legislators were presented with a case that described a struggling public hospital and asked whether they would recommend closing it. Two-thirds of the legislators recommended shutting it down. Other legislators were presented with a similar case with a new wrinkle, the added possibility of closing a second struggling hospital. When asked which of the two they would prefer to close, they also could choose to make no recommendations. Only a quarter of the legislators recommended shutting either of them. Based on these studies and others like them, researchers concluded that when people are presented with options involving trade-offs that create conflict, all choices begin to look unappealing. People find decision making that involves trade-offs so unpleasant that they will clutch at almost anything to help them decide. Consider this scenario from another study. Imagine that you serve on the jury of an only child sole custody case following a relatively messy divorce. The facts of the case are complicated by ambiguous economic, social, and emotional considerations, and you decide to base your decision entirely on the following few observations: Parent A and Parent B. Parent A, average income; Parent B, average, above average income; Parent A, average health; Parent B, minor health problems; Parent A, average working hours; Parent B, lots of work related travel; Parent A, reasonable rapport with child; B, very close relationship with the child; A, relatively stable social life; B, extremely active social life. To which parent would you award sole custody of the child? Faced with this scenario, 64% of respondents chose to award the child to parent B, whereas parent A was sort of average in every way. Parent B had two very positive features and three negative ones, and for most people the positive outweighed the negatives. Or did they? Another group of respondents were given exactly the same information as the first, but asked a slightly different question. Which parent would you deny sole custody of the child? With the judgment framed in this negative language, the percentage of those voting for the child to go to B dropped from 64% to 55%. Difficult choices like this one set people off on a chase for reasons to justify their decisions. What kinds of reasons are they looking for? In the first instance, they are looking for reasons to accept a parent, and parent B offers them high income and a close relationship. In the second instance, people are looking for reasons to reject a parent. Parent B offers these as well: health problems, work, travel, too much socializing. Respondents cling to the form of the question, award or deny, as a guide to the kinds of reasons they will be looking for. It's one way to reduce or avoid conflict. If you're looking only at the negatives, then you don't have to worry about trade offs with the positives. Decision conflict is an important ingredient in the examples of decision avoidance that I've just described, but it isn't the only ingredient. Think about trying to decide whether to buy a digital camera with your year end bonus. A digital camera will allow you to manipulate the images you capture and send them easily to friends and family, both of which attract you. Is it worth the money? You think about it for a while and decide. Now, imagine trying to decide whether to buy a mountain bike with your bonus. You love to ride for exercise, especially in the hills outside the town in which you live. Is it worth the money? You think about it for a while and decide. Now, imagine trying to decide whether to buy a mountain bike or a digital camera. Each option represents a gain, positive features it has that the other doesn't, and a loss, positive features it doesn't have that the other does. We saw in chapter 3 that people tend to display loss aversion. The loss of $100 is more painful than the gain of $100 is pleasurable. What that means is that when the mountain bike and the digital camera are compared, each will suffer from the comparison. If you choose the camera, you'll gain the quality and convenience of digital photography, but lose the exercise in lovely surroundings. Because losses have a greater impact than gains, the net result will be that the camera fares less well when compared with the mountain bike than it would have if you were evaluating it on its own. And the same is true of the mountain bike. Once again, this suggests that whenever we are forced to make decisions involving trade offs, we'll feel less good about the option we choose than we would have if the alternatives hadn't been there. This was confirmed by a study in which people were asked how much they would be willing to pay for subscriptions to popular magazines or to purchase videotapes of popular movies. Some were asked about individual magazines or videos. Others were asked about these same magazines or videos as part of a group with other magazines or videos. In almost every case, respondents placed a higher value on the magazine or the video when they were evaluating it in isolation than when they were evaluating it as part of a cluster. When magazines are evaluated as part of a group, each of them will both gain and lose from the comparisons, and because the losses will loom larger than the gains, the net result of the comparison will be negative. Bottom line, the option we consider usually suffer from the comparison with other options. Trade-offs. Emotional unpleasantness makes for bad decisions. Just about everyone seems to appreciate that thinking about trade-offs makes for better decisions. We want our doctors to be weighing trade-offs before making treatment recommendations. We want our investment advisors carefully considering trade-offs before making investment recommendations. We want consumer reports to evaluate trade-offs before making purchasing recommendations. We just don't want to have to evaluate trade-offs ourselves, and we don't want to do it because it is emotionally unpleasant to go through the process of thinking about opportunity costs and the losses they imply. The emotional cost of potential trade-off does more than just diminish our sense of satisfaction with a decision. It also interferes with the quality of decisions themselves. There is a great deal of evidence that negative emotional states of mind narrow our focus. Instead of examining all aspects of a decision, we home in on only one or two, perhaps ignoring aspects of the decision that are very important. Negative emotion also distracts us, inducing us to focus on the emotion rather than on the decision itself. As the stakes of decision involving trade offs rise, emotions become more powerful and our decision making can be severely impaired. Researchers have known for years about the harmful effects of negative emotion on thinking and decision making. More recent evidence has shown that positive emotion has the opposite effect. When we are in a good mood, we think better, we consider more possibilities, we are open to considerations that would otherwise not occur to us. We see subtle connections between pieces of information that we might otherwise miss. Something as trivial as a little gift of candy to medical residents improves the speed and accuracy of their diagnosis. In general, positive emotion enables us to broaden our understanding of what confronts us. This creates something of a paradox. We seem to do our best thinking when we are feeling good. Complex decisions involving multiple options with multiple features, like which job should I take, demand our best thinking. Yet, those very decisions seem to induce in us emotional reactions that will impair our ability to do just the kind of thinking that is necessary. Opportunity costs, trade offs, and exploding options. We've seen that as the number of options under consideration goes up and the attractive features associated with the rejected alternatives accumulate, the satisfaction derived from the chosen alternative will go down. This is one reason, and a very important one, why adding options can be detrimental to our well being. Because we don't put rejected options out of our minds, we experience the disappointment of having our satisfaction with the decisions diluted by all the options we considered but did not choose. In light of these cumulative negative effects of opportunity costs, it is tempting to recommend that in making decisions, we ignore opportunity costs altogether. If opportunity costs complicate the decision and they make us miserable, why think about them? Unfortunately, it is very difficult to judge whether a potential investment is a good one without knowing about the attractiveness of the alternatives. The same is true of a job or a vacation or a medical procedure or almost anything else. And once we start considering alternatives, the matter of opportunity costs is bound to come up. Only rarely is one option clearly better in every way than the rest. Choosing almost always involves giving up something else of value. So, thinking about opportunity cost is probably an essential part of wise decision making. The trick is to limit the set of possibilities so that the opportunity costs don't add up to make all the alternatives unattractive. Appreciating the cumulative burden posed by opportunity costs can help us better understand the findings of the study mentioned in Chapter 1, in which two sets of participants encountered a variety of different flavors of a brand of high quality jam at a sample table set up in a gourmet food store. Some people were presented with 6 different samples on the table, while others saw 24. They could taste as many as they wanted and then were given a coupon of $1 discount on any jam they purchased. The larger display of samples attracted more shoppers, but these individuals did not sample more different jams. Remarkably, shoppers who saw the larger display were less likely actually to buy jam than those who saw the smaller display, much less likely. In another study, students were offered either 6 or 30 different topics to choose from for an extra credit essay. The students offered 6 topics were more likely to write essays and wrote better essays than the students offered 30 topics. In a third study, students evaluated either 6 or 30 gourmet chocolates on their visual appeal, then picked one to taste and evaluate, and were then offered a small box of the chocolates in lieu of payment for participating in the study. Students who were exposed to 30 chocolates gave lower ratings to the chocolate they tasted and were less likely to take a box of chocolates rather than money after the experiment than students who were exposed to only 6. This set of results is counterintuitive. Surely, you are more likely to find something you like from a set of 24 or 30 options than from a set of 6. At worst, the extra options adding nothing, but in that case, they should also take away nothing. But when there are 24 jams to consider, it is easy to imagine that many of them will have attractive features, novelty, sweetness, texture, color, and who knows what else. As the chooser closes in on a decision, the various attractive features of the jams not chosen can mount up to make the preferred jam seem less exceptional. It may still be the one that wins the competition, but its attractiveness score is no longer high enough to warrant a purchase. Similarly, with regard to essay topics, some may be attractive because students already know a lot about them, others become because they are provocative, others because they have personal relevance, and still others because they relate to ideas students are discussing in another course. But the potential attractiveness of each will subtract from the attractiveness of all of the others. The net result after the subtraction is that none of the topics will be attractive enough to overcome inertia and get the students to sit down at the word processor. And if he does sit down as he tries to write about the topic he's chosen, he may be further distracted by other appealing but rejected topics. It may prevent him from thinking clearly, or perhaps the negative emotion aroused by having had to consider trade offs will narrow his thinking. Either way, the quality of the essay will suffer. Some years ago, when my wife and I made a trip to Paris for a long weekend, I had an experience that I couldn't understand until I began to write this chapter. We arrived from London on a gorgeous sunny afternoon. We took a leisurely stroll along one of the city's magnificent boulevards and looked for a place to eat a much anticipated lunch. At each restaurant, we studied the menu posted outside. The first place we saw held out all sorts of enticing possibilities, and I was ready to halt the search right then. But how could we be in Paris and just walk into the first restaurant we encountered? So we kept walking and checked out another and another and another. Just about every place we saw seemed wonderful. But after about an hour and a dozen menus, I found myself losing my appetite. The restaurants we encountered seemed less and less attractive. By the end of an hour, I would have been perfectly happy to skip lunch altogether. I appeared to have discovered a great new dieting technique, satiation by simulation. You just imagine yourself eating dishes you love, and after you've imagined enough of them, you start to get full. When the time finally comes to sit down and eat, you don't have much appetite. In fact, what was happening was the build up of opportunity costs. As I encountered one attractive alternative after another, each new alternative just reduced the potential pleasure I would feel after I made my choice. By the end of the hour, there was no pleasure left to be had. Clearly, the cumulative opportunity cost of adding options to one's choice set can reduce satisfaction. It may even make a person miserable. But I think there is another reason for this decline, one that I can illustrate with the following example. Until recently, I lived in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, the beautiful suburban community that houses the college where I teach. This community had a lot going for it. It was densely green with many old and magnificent trees. It was peaceful and quiet. It was safe. The schools were good. I could walk to work. In short, it was a fine place to live. But one thing it decidedly did not have going for it was a good video store. There was only a branch of a national chain, and while it offered about 1 million copies of the latest box office smash, there were rather slim pickings among less commercial movies or older movies, and the pickings were among movies made in a language other than English were almost non-existent. This created a problem for me, especially when I had to be the one to choose a movie that my family or friends would watch together. Choosing a movie for others is not my favorite activity. You'll remember perhaps that it's one of the questions on the maximization scale that I showed you in chapter 4. There is pressure to choose a film that will surprise and delight people, and in my circle, it had become something of a parlor game to make fun of a bad selection and the person responsible for it. On the other hand, the critics back home were only kidding. And more important, even if they were serious, they were fully aware that the options at the local video store were profoundly impoverished. So back in Swarthmore, nobody had high expectations and nobody seriously faulted the chooser for whatever he came home with. Then I moved to this heart of downtown Philadelphia. 3 blocks from my house is a video store that has everything, movies from every era, every genre, every country. So now, what's at stake when I go to rent a video from the group for the group? Now, whose fault will it be if I bring back something that people regard as a waste of time? Now, it is no longer a reflection of the quality of the store. Now, it's a reflection of the quality of my taste. So, the availability of many attractive options means that there is no longer an excuse for failure. The blame for a bad choice will rest squarely with me, and the stakes involved in my video choice have escalated. Even decisions as trivial as renting a video become important if we believe that these decisions are revealing something significant about ourselves. Choices and reasons. As the stakes of decisions rise, we feel an increased need to justify them. We feel compelled to articulate, at least to ourselves, why we made a particular choice. This need to search for reasons seems useful. It ought to improve the quality of our choice, but it doesn't necessarily. It may seem self evident that every choice requires a reason, but several recent studies suggest that this simple and straightforward model of decision making isn't always accurate. In one such study, participants were asked to taste and rank 5 different kinds of jam. One group was given no instructions to follow. A second group was told to think about their reasons as they were determining their rankings. After the tasting, the experimenters compared their participants' rankings to those of experts that had been published in Consumer Reports. What the researchers found is that participants who weren't given instructions produced rankings that were closer to those of the experts than participants instructed to think about their reasons. While this result doesn't necessarily show that thinking about reasons for decisions makes them worse, it does show that thinking about reasons can alter the decisions. This implies that people are not always thinking first and deciding second. In another study, college students were asked to evaluate 5 posters of the sort that often decorate dorm rooms. 2 represented works of fine art, a Monet and a Van Gogh. The other 3 featured captioned cartoons of photos of animals. Pre-testing with other students had determined that most people preferred the Van Gogh and the Monet to the kitschy posters of cartoons and animals. In this particular study, half of the people were asked to write a brief essay explaining why they liked or disliked each of the 5. They were assured that no one would read what they wrote. The others weren't given this instruction. The students then rated each of the posters. In addition, when the session was over, the experimenter told them that they could take one of the posters home. Copies of each posters were sitting rolled up in bins, blank side facing out, so that the students didn't have to worry about their taste being judged by others. Several weeks later, each participant received a phone call. Each was asked how satisfied he or she was with the poster. Did they still have it? Was it hanging on the wall? Were they planning to take it home with them for the summer? Could they be talked into selling it? The first interesting result of this study was that the people asked to write down their thoughts preferred the funny posters to those featuring fine art. In contrast, those who were not asked to write preferred the fine art. Inducing people to give reasons for their preferences, even if only to themselves, seemed to change their preferences. Consistent with this effect, participants who wrote down reasons were more likely to choose a funny poster to take home than those who did not give reasons. But most important, in the follow up phone call, participants who had written down their reasons were less satisfied with the poster they had chosen than those who did not. They were less likely to have kept the poster, less likely to have it hanging, less likely to want to take it home, and more willing to sell it. What these studies show is that when people are asked to give reasons for their preferences, they may struggle to find the words. Sometimes aspects of their reaction that are not the most important determinants of their overall feeling are nonetheless easiest to verbalize. People may have less trouble expressing why one poster is funnier than another, than why the Van Gogh print is more beautiful than the Monet. So they grasp at what they can say and identify it as the basis of their preference. But once the words are spoken, they take an added significance to the person who spoke them. At the moment of choice, these explicit, verbalized reasons weigh heavily in the decision. As time passes, the reasons that people verbalized fade into the background, and people are left with the unarticulated preferences which wouldn't have steered them to the poster they chose. As the salience of the verbalized reasons fades, so too does people's satisfaction with the decision they made. In a final example, college couples were recruited to participate in a study of the effects of romantic relationships on the college experience. After an initial session in the laboratory, participants filled out a questionnaire about their relationship each week. For 4 weeks in the laboratory session, half of the people were asked to fill up a page analyzing the reasons why their relationship with their dating partner was the way it was. The other half filled up a page explaining why they had chosen their major. As you can probably guess, writing about their relationship changed people's attitudes about it. For some, attitudes became more positive, for others, they became more negative. But they changed. Again, the likely explanation is that what is most easily put into words is not necessarily what is most important, but once aspects of a relationship are put into words, their importance to the verbalizer takes on added significance. A more optimistic view of this last result is that the process of analyzing a relationship actually produces insight so that we better understand the true nature of our relationship. But the evidence suggests otherwise. When students who had been asked to analyze their relationships were compared to students not asked to do so, the researchers found that unanalyzed attitudes about the relationship were a better predictor of whether the relationship would still be intact months later than analyzed attitudes. Those who were asked to supply reasons and express positive feelings about their relationships were not necessarily still in the relationship 6 months later. As in the poster study, being asked to give reasons can make an important considerations salient temporarily and produce a less, not a more accurate assessment of how people really feel. In discussing these studies, I am not suggesting that we will always or even frequently be better off going with our gut when making choices. What I am suggesting is there are pitfalls to deciding after analyzing. My concern, given the research on trade-offs and opportunity costs, is that as the number of options goes up, the need to provide justification for decisions also increases. And though this struggle to find reasons will lead to decisions that seem right at the moment, it will not necessarily lead to decisions that feel right later on. I am fortunate to teach at a college that attracts some of the most talented young people in the world. While students at many colleges are happy to discover a subject to study that not only do they enjoy but that will enable them to make a living, many of the students I teach have multiple interests and capabilities. These students face the task of deciding on the one thing that they want to do more than anything else. Unconstrained by limitations of talent, the world is the world is open to them. Do they exult in this opportunity? Not most of the ones I talk to. Instead, they agonize between making money and doing something of lasting social value, between challenging their intellects and exercising their creative impulses, between work that demands single-mindedness and work that will enable them to live balanced lives, between work they can do in a beautiful pastoral location and work that brings them to a bustling city, between any work at all and further study. With a decision as important as this, they struggle to find the reasons that make one choice stand out above all the others. In addition, because of the flexibility that one characterizes relations among family, friends, and lovers, my students can't even use obligations to other people as a way to limit their possibilities. Where the people they love are located and how close to them they want to be are just more factors to be entered into the decision, to be traded off against various aspects of the jobs themselves. Everything is up for grabs. Almost anything is possible, and each possibility they consider has its attractive features, so that the opportunity costs associated with those attractive options keep mounting up, making the whole decision making process decidedly unattractive. What they wonder is the right thing to do. How can they know? As this chapter has shown, decisions like these arouse discomfort and they force indecision. Students take time off, take on odd jobs, try out internships, hoping that the right answer to the "what should I be when I grow up" question will emerge. One quickly learns that "what are you going to do when you graduate" is not a question many students are eager to hear, let alone answer. It is hard to avoid the conclusion that my students might be better off with a little less talent or with a little more of a sense that they owed it to their families to settle down back home, or even a dose of desperation, of depression era necessity. Take the secure job and get on with it. With fewer options and more constraints, many trade offs would be eliminated, and there would be less self doubt, less of an effort to justify decisions, more satisfaction, and less second guessing of the decisions once made. The anguish and inertia caused by having too many choices was described in the book Quarter Life Crisis: The Unique Challenges of Life in Your 20s. Through interviews, the book captures the doubts and regrets that seem to be overwhelming successful young adults. No stability, no certainty, no predictability, intense self doubt, people taking longer to settle down. National statistics confirm the impressions captured in the book. Both men and women marry 5 years later now than they did a generation ago. What could create larger opportunity cost than choosing one mate and losing the chance to enjoy all the attractive features of other potential spouses? People also stay in their jobs less than half as long, on average, as they did a generation ago, whereas delaying marriage and avoiding commitment to a particular job would seem to promote self discovery. This freedom and self exploration seems to leave many people feeling more lost than found. And as one young respondent put it, what happens when you have too many options is that you are responsible for what happens to you. How can, how can it be so hard to choose? For most of human history, people were not really faced with an array of choices and opportunity costs. Instead of "should I take A or B or C?" or the question people asked themselves was more like "should I take it or leave it?" In a world of scarcity, opportunities don't present themselves in bunches, and the decision people face are between approach and avoidance, acceptance or rejection. We can assume that having a good sense of this, of what's good and what's bad, was essential for survival. But distinguishing between good and bad is a far simpler matter than distinguishing good from better from best. After millions of years of survival based on simple distinctions, it may simply be that we are biologically unprepared for the number of choices we face in the modern world. As psychologist Susan Sugarman has pointed out, you can see this thumbnail history of our species played out in the early development of children. Babies don't have to choose among options, they simply accept or reject what the world presents to them. The same is true of toddlers. Do you want some juice? Would you like to go to the park? Do you want to go down the slide? Parents ask the questions and the toddlers answer yes or no. Then, all of a sudden, perhaps when children have developed sufficient skill with language to make communication reliable, their parents are asking them, do you want apple juice or orange juice? Do you want to go to the park or to the swimming pool? Do you want to go down the slide or go on the swings? Now, yes or no will no longer do the job. One mother described the dilemma facing her 5-year-old this way. I have noticed that my son sometimes has difficulty making the sorts of choices that exclude one thing or another. I have the sense that it has to do with a sense of loss, that choosing one thing over another will mean that one thing is lost. Finally, making the choice somehow minimizes the pleasure in the thing that is gained, though there also seems to be an accompanying relief in finally making the choice. I have noticed him deliberating as if he is frozen with indecision. He literally cannot make the decision unless he is gently prodded. Most recently, I noticed him doing this when given a choice between different colored popsicles. We all learn as we grow up that living requires making choices and passing up opportunities, but our evolutionary history makes this a difficult lesson. Learning to choose is hard, learning to choose well is harder, and learning to choose well in a world of unlimited possibilities is harder still, perhaps too hard. Reversible decisions, an illusory solution to the choice problem. Is it returnable? Can I get my deposit back? Affirmative answers to these questions have soothed many a troubled decision maker, at least temporarily. We think of trade offs as hearten less and opportunity costs as less troublesome. If we know that we can change our minds when it looks like we've made a mistake, indeed, many of us would probably be willing to pay a premium to retain the option of being allowed to change our minds. Often, we do just that by rejecting sale merchandise, no return or exchange permitted, and choosing items at full price. Perhaps one of the reasons major decisions are so difficult that they are largely non reversible. Marriage doesn't come with a money back guarantee, neither does a career. Changes in either involve substantial costs in time, energy, emotion, and money. So it might seem like good advice to encourage people to approach their decisions as reversible and their mistakes as fixable. The door stays open, the account stays active, facing decisions, large or small. With this attitude should mitigate many of the stresses and negative emotions we've been examining. Yes, but at a price. A series of recent studies gave some people a choice that was reversible and others a choice that was non reversible. In one case, participants chose one photograph from a set of 8 by 10 black and white prints they had made in a photography course. In another case, they chose one small poster from a set of fine art reproductions. What emerged from the findings was that while participants valued being able to reverse their choices, almost no one actually did so. However, those who had the option to change their minds were less satisfied with their choices than participants who did not have that option. And perhaps most important, the participants had no idea that keeping the option open to change their minds would affect their satisfaction with the things they chose. So keeping options open seems to extract a psychological price. When when we can change our minds, apparently we do less psychological work to justify the decision we've made, reinforcing the chosen alternative and disparaging the rejected ones. Perhaps we do less work putting opportunity costs of the rejected alternatives out of our minds. After all, if you put down a non-refundable deposit for a house Martha's, on Martha's Vineyard, you focus on the beauty of the beach and the dunes. On the other hand, if your deposit is refundable, if the door is still open, you may continue to weigh that jungle hideaway in Costa Rica you are also considering. The beach and the dunes won't get any better in your mind, and the rainforest won't get any less appealing. Or to raise the stakes, consider the possible difference between those who regard marital vows as sacred and unbreakable and those who regard them as agreements that can be reversed or undone by mutual consent. We would expect that those who see marriage as a non-reversible commitment will be more inclined to do psychological work that makes them feel satisfied with their decision than will those whose attitude about marriage is more relaxed. As a result, individuals with non-reversible marriages might be more satisfied than individuals with reversible ones. As we see reversible marriages come apart, we may think to ourselves how fortunate the couple was to have a flexible attitude toward marital commitment. Given that it didn't work out, it might not occur to us that the flexible attitude might have played a causal role in the marriage's failure. Choices, opportunity costs, and maximizers. Nobody likes to make trade offs, nobody likes to watch opportunity costs mount. But the problem of trade offs and opportunity costs will be dramatically attenuated for a satisficer. Recall that satisficers are looking for something that's good enough, not something that's best. Good enough can survive thinking about opportunity costs. In addition, the good enough standard likely will entail much less searching and inspection of alternatives than the maximizer's best standard. With fewer alternatives under consideration, there will be fewer opportunity costs to be subtracted. Finally, a satisficer is not likely to be thinking about the hypothetical perfect world in which options exist that contain all the things they value and trade-offs are necessary. For all these reasons, the pain of making trade-offs will be especially acute for maximizers. Indeed, I believe that one of the reasons that maximizers are less happy, less satisfied with their lives, and more depressed than satisficers is precisely because the taint of trade-offs and opportunity costs washes out much that should be satisfying about the decisions they make.